My name is Tage Frid. I'm an old woodworker. I came to the United States from Denmark in 1948 to teach furniture design and cabinet making at the School for American Craftsmen. After a couple of thousand students, I learned a few things. My father was a silversmith and he had a shop. So I was always in there and use his tools, working with wood. And boy, did I get hit a few times for that. My father had a friend and he had a wood shop. So he said, "You want to be a woodworker and an apprentice?" "Yeah, I want to go out and play in the street." Right? So I became an apprentice by accident. And the apprenticeship was 5 years. I got $1 a week and all the spanking I wanted. I had to be in there at 7 o'clock and put the heat, the sharp, and the glue. So the glue pot was warm when the journeymen come in. This is a cabinet I finished a few weeks ago. The wood is Honduras mahogany, and the concave panel is fiddleback mahogany. The bead is not applied, it's actually part of the frame itself. The door is a little longer than the cabinet is high, so I could use it for a handle. This is a difficult cabinet to make because all the detail has to be right on exactly, or else the cabinet will look like hell. Like in this case, the bead on the frame and the bead on the leg has to line up perfect. Before I come that far and I'm able to make that cabinet, I have to do a lot of experimentation first. So I made a smaller cabinet first. Here, again, I use the same wood, but the solid wood in the panel is maple to emphasize the concave panel. These are brass hands, and by the way, I have to get them in Denmark. The shelf is made adjustable, so you can change to whatever height you want. Because the cabinet wasn't covered evenly, the piece that was exposed gets much darker, but eventually the whole cabinet will blend out and have the same color. The carcass is made with a hidden spline mitered joint, and I'll show you how I made it. I only have an 8-inch joiner, and the pieces here are 10 inches wide, so I had to go in next door and use the big joiner. There is 4 different wood shops here in the same building, and we all get along very well. I cut all 4 corners 45 degrees on the table saw. Then I mark the dimension of the splines. In that case, it's a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Then I mark it across the end of the joint. Then I made a jig to guide the router with the temper bushing attached. Be sure to mark the front of the jig and always have the front of the jig flush with the edge of the piece you're going to route. Then start the router with a straight bit and follow the jig. I made this jig using a table saw. It is easy to set up. It's just like when you make a finger joint. Because the router bit is round, later on I will square out the end of the cut. When you set the jig, be sure the bit won't cut into the inside line of the miter. Be sure when you flip the jig over that it is flush with the edge again in the other piece. Here you can actually see the bushing sliding right into the slot of the jig. And now you square up the end of the router cut. Use a chisel that's a little less than the diameter of the router bit. In this case, I use a 5/16 of 1 inch bit, so I use a 1/4 of an inch chisel. And be sure all the surface is square and clean, so you get a good strong glue joint. Be sure that the side of the cut is perfectly flush and square. No undercutting. Before the hand router was invented, you will have to use a full blind dovetail, which is a big job. This joint is much faster to make, and I think it's much stronger. To cut the width and the length of the spline so they fit in perfect. Clamp a piece of wood to the fence and set it and check it for the width. After it's cut to width, then move the block back without changing the setting of the fence and cut it to length. This way the spline has to come out exactly the same size and square. I use a hologram blade because it gives a cleaner cut, and because I have to go with the grain and cross cut, it's a very good blade for doing both. So now it's time to, without glue, to check it if the joint is perfect. I make the spline 1/32 smaller than the width and the length of the groove, but the thickness should be real tight. To clamp it together, if I'm going to use regular clamp, I'll line up with 20 clamps and you'll be in the way for each other. So instead, I made some glue blocks. It's just a piece of plywood, and on each end I cut a piece 45 degrees, so I can clamp direct on the joint. At the same time, I can hit it. Because there's a little play in the spline, I can move it back and forth so it fit perfectly on the outside. Then I check it for squareness by measuring from corner to corner. I never use a square because the side might be both. This is a powder resin glue, and they recommend 5 powder powder to 2 powder water. Don't put the whole thing in at once. You will line up a big bundle of lumps in there. Add the water slowly and keep stirring it until it becomes like heavy cream. The brush that I'm using is actually a brush for soldering, and it only costs 20 cents a piece, so when I'm finished with it, I can throw it out. Be sure to put the glue inside the slot. Don't put the glue on the spline because it might swell before you get the cabinet together. In a case like that, you better be 2 people. You better have some helpers because it is impossible to do alone. This is my grandson, Ben Randall, helping me. Okay, now we lay down the back.
Okay.
Then check that the joints are perfectly tight. Use a rubber hammer to move you can slide it back and forth still. Don't use a steel hammer, you're going to put marks on it. Because the block is a 32nd of an inch smaller than the slot, I can adjust so they fit perfect inside and outside. Then again, I check for squareness. Check it from corner to corner. Don't use a square. The surest part is measure from corner to corner and it will be perfectly square. If the joint isn't perfectly tight on the outside, use a hammer to just bend the fibers so they come out perfect. Så kold den lille hånd er, lad mig varme den i din. A funny thing happened. I only been there for 3 or 4 weeks, and I come in with a pink shirt and knickers and, you know, a clean little boy. And so then I decided, okay, I'm going to make a knife box for my mother. So I started working, and then the master called me and told me I had to go to the hardware store. I think, can that idiot say I'm busy? So I went and told him, I don't have time, I'm making a knife box for my mother. I got called in the office, I find out who was a master and who was the apprentice.
Cool. That's fine. No.
These are 3 stools, 3 three-legged stools I made many years ago. Here's one for a child, and this for dining, and then this one is actually for kitchen or bar and so on, and that's the most usable one, I think. I once went to a horse show, and I was sitting there for about 4 hours on about a 6-inch wide plank. Then all of a sudden, I realized the only thing you sit on is your 2 cheekbones, not the 2 up here, but the 2 below. So I went home and started thinking about, actually we don't need all that space. Like in a wooden chair, you don't sit on the heel, you sit on the whole seat, but all the weight of the body is on the cheekbones. So I started experimenting with how small I could make the seat. And I finally, after experimenting back and forth, I come out with the seat like that. And then of course you need the back. At the same time with this chair here, or any of the three of them, you can sit in like that, and you can turn around, and you can sit in it like that, but it's quite comfortable. Now, the most very important joint in this chair here is, or stool, is that it's a dovetail joint, and you have to be sure it's very strong. Because when people sit down in a chair, then they come and you don't sit down very carefully. Say, "Pooh, what a day I had." And you put a lot of stress on that joint here. If it is not done right, it's going to break. The leg is attached, and of course I drilled a hole. I used a plug cutter and make like a dowel on the lathe. Then with a saw cut, glue them in. I did the same with the stretchers. As you can see here, you put the wedge in the leg, going across the grain in the lathe. If you put in the wedge in the same direction as the grain in the lathe, it's going to split it. The first stool I made, I turned the legs and the stretchers so they were round. I was staying in the shop for 2 or 3 weeks. So every morning I walked in, I would see it. I know there was something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, all of a sudden I realized the seat and the back is oval. And then the legs are round, you're fighting each other. So then I made the legs oval too, and the stretchers oval, and they worked out beautiful. I mean, I like it anyway. This is a sideboard I made for my wife. She wanted a sideboard, and if I come down all the way to the floor, because the room is very small, then it will make the room look much smaller. Because when you come in, you will see the floor and you cut off all that square footage down here. That'll make the room look smaller. The same like in a kitchen. You let the kitchen cabinet go up to the ceiling. When you come in, you see the whole ceiling, and you really squeeze the whole size of the kitchen. The idea for this was, I made an altar. The idea is actually like a half of the cross. You can see the piece is just like a cross with the top cut off. This particular piece here, I used the theme is like a dovetail. As you can see, the bottom, the pedestal here, is a full dovetail, and the pull is shaped like a half a pin. It is square up here and 25-30 degrees below. The same here with the side, and the shape of the end of the cabinet is also a half a pin. The idea for the panel feeling here of the top, the side, the front, I got from looking at a door. I think, gee, it could be nice to take the panel out and make a cabinet. So as you can see, it is actually just a panel. You put a frame around it and it'd be like a door. And the same down here. Now you have to watch that line and this line line up. And this one line up. And these two, because your eye will tell if that line is off. Your eye will want to have that, and so you have to be very careful that these line up too. The first year, I was delivering furniture, you know, one of those with the 2 wheels and the handles. So after about a year, I went in and say, okay, I know how to run that push cart. I would like to do some woodwork. He liked that. I decided to put a drawer in this cabinet. Whenever you make a drawer, always fit it in very tight before you join it. fit the front and the back very, very tight, and the two sides too. When you dovetail it and sand it, it's going to slip right in. When you make a dovetail and you set the marking gauge, make it so it is just a little thicker than the thickness of the wood you're going to work into. First you mark the length of the pin and the tail on all the sides, except on the front. And in the front, in this case, I use the same setting for the depth of the pin. The arrow points towards the front. And because you split the two drawer sides, they'll tell you what is the right and the left side. This is the front and the back. And it is the same thing. Here is a line in the center, and then the arrow that points towards the front. And you do it in the bottom, so you know what is the bottom, what is the top, what is right and left. To get the angle of the dovetail is very important. If the angle is too steep, it will break the end of the tail when you put it together. If the angle isn't enough, then it's like a finger joint. So I use 1 to 5. Have a square line with, in this case, a ½ inch down the bottom and 2.5 inches on the top. And that gives me the best angle. I prefer to put a half-blind dovetail in the front because I didn't want to have a true dovetail shown in the front of the drawer. Here I'm spacing the pins evenly in front of the drawer. Of course, in a big drawer, I'll have more space between each pin, and in a smaller drawer, they will be a little closer together. But there's no real rule for that. Then, of course, you mark the top of the dovetail like we did, and then square them down. I use a bow saw because I was brought up with it, and it cuts much faster than any other saw I know of. It is filed as a rip saw. I never use a crosscut because it takes longer time, and it doesn't cut near as smooth. So if I get a crosscut saw, I always change it to a rip. Because I have to cut both lines at the same time, the angle of the dovetail and the square line down, I have to tilt the front of the drawer so I can see both. Jeg kun kom til på den. Be careful to go right to the gauge line on the end and the inside of the drawer. I use a bandsaw blade, an old bandsaw blade, to continue the saw cut and get it square down in the bottom. If you don't do that, you're going to spend a lot of time to clean out the corners. To prevent the drawer front to split, I clamp 2 blocks on each side. And that's one reason too I use a bow saw, because the bandsaw blade and the blade in the bow saw is exactly the same thickness. So if you can't get a bandsaw blade, you can use an old scraper blade or anything that's stiff enough you can hit on without bending. Now it's very important you have a sharp chisel. I use my belt sander with a 220 grit sandpaper on. I sand it until you get a burr in the back. Then I move it over to the buffer and I use a compound for polishing steel. And then I just shine up the bevel. Don't try to buff the back. Then you get two bevels. You just continue doing that until the burr in the back is gone. I can shave with this one, and actually in school I show it to the students, but I'm not allowed to do it here. Okay, I'm making the line deeper so I can cut the V in the front so the chisel can rest up against the line. After the V-cut is made, rest the chisel up against it and undercut it, but don't hit it too hard in the beginning because it would move the line in. So then when the back of the chisel has more to rest again, you can really hammer it down. I'm going to remove the pieces on top down to where the depth I cut with the chisel. Split the waste in half so you won't hurt the sharp edges of the pin.
Isn't that bigger, mother?
Now you can continue chiseling down and you can use a lot of power. Here in the front, when you remove the wood, be sure to undercut it. The only thing we need is to have the sharp lines at the outside of the pin. You're not going to see the inside, so it doesn't matter how beautiful it is. The main thing is keep those lines sharp. And you can see here, because I use that bandsaw blade, you see how clean the corners are? Because you can imagine if I haven't used that, there'll be a half a day's work to clean that out, right? Then again clean out the corners so when the tail goes down there's nothing to hold it back. I always make the pin first so I can scribe the tails from the pin. There is a more complicated way to do it. You can make the tail first, but then to scribe the pin is a real Mickey Mouse, and I use the word Mickey Mouse way to do it. You have to clamp it off, make a special jig to hold it, and then get in there, and because it's ingrained, you don't have the control of the line. Here you can really see the undercut. The reason for our undercut is I want to be 100% sure that when the tail goes in, there is no pressure on the tail to be pushed out, in which case the fiber in the tail would break. Like my wife said, that doesn't look very neat, but you won't see it anyway, and the faster I can get that wood removed, the more money I'm going to make for her. Here I'm cutting the pin for the true dovetail in the back the mirror, put a shadow on the line so I can see better when I cut it. Okay. Now here again, I repeat the same thing just like I did in the front. And now because it is a true dovetail, I can approach it from both sides. Here I don't have to split the waist because the pin is opening up. When I scribe the tail from the pin, I never use a knife. I always use a scriber. The scriber will want to follow the grain in the wood and will automatically push itself right up against the pin. I don't use a knife because the knife might cut the edge of the pin and the tail wouldn't fit at all. Now we're cutting the tail on the side of the drawer. Of course, I will square it across first. The mirror throws the shadow so I clearly can see the scribed line I made from the pin. The point of the scriber made a little V shape in the wood. So when you cut it, have the saw cut on the waist side. In that case, you split the line in half. Don't use a pencil, because if you use a pen, you just make one fat line, you don't know where you are. Now I do the same. I deepen the gate line and put in the V-cut for the chisel to rest again, and then chisel it out from both sides. A scraper blade is maybe one of the most important tools you have in the whole toolbox the minute you come to finishing. There is many different instruments, how to sharpen it and how to set it. It costs a lot of money, and here's what I do. I file it with a mill file and then put some heavy machine oil on. Then spread it out. Now you put oil on the back of the chisel. You could buy a burnisher, but I'm a cheapskate and the chisel even works better. My thumb is putting it down so it's flat. And of course the other finger slide along the edge so you don't cut the fingers on the other hand. Then you have to go back to school and take shorthands. With very little pressure on in the beginning. Then as you go along, get more and more excited and put more and more pressure on. Then everything is out flat. And now I set the burr that's going to do the cutting. If that is 90 degrees, the filing, maybe put 80 degrees or something. Very little, not too big a burr and too much angle. And here again, you start very light and then put a little more pressure on. Just think of when you are with a girl and want to hold her hand the first time. Now you can see that thing cut off some shavings, right? If you're going to sand it, you know, we have people, oh, I sanded and sanded and sanded. This one could do in 1 minute what would take a half an hour to sand it. When you use it, don't push it, always pull it towards you. See, if you push it, then you bend the scraper blade and you make a lot of concave into the surface. With this way, you see the back of the hands keep this blade perfectly flat. See, now it's getting dull. You see, it doesn't take very much off. So now I go back again. I don't file it again, but I set it. I just put on the burr and set it back up again, and that will sharpen. You can maybe do that 7 or 8 times before you have to file it again. Can you see the difference now? Then you can sand it. Don't sand it too much. In one way, the more you sand it, the sandpaper has a tendency to take off all the soft spots, and it gets very uneven. Now when you put glue on, just put it on the edge. Don't smear it all over so you run on the floor, all over yourself, just on the edge. Then as it goes down, then the glue will be pushed up along the sides of the pin and the tail. Then rub it in so the glue, you're sure it is all in there. Then you do exactly the same thing to the back. Just put on the pin and the tail. Then, if it's not perfectly tight there, you can pin it down with a hammer when the glue is still wet. Now you measure from corner to corner again. If it's off a little, you can squeeze it. The joints are tight. The dirt you can see on there is just, there was glue on the surface and you picked up the dirt from the bench. Now, on purpose, I left it like that, so you can see what do you do in a situation like that. You have to fill it with something, but so the grain go in the same direction, the long grain with the long grain and the end grain with the end grain. You take a piece of wood, it's a little too thick, and then you pin it down, so you really squeeze all the fibers together. Then cut it to size. The insert should be made out of the same piece of wood. Now you rub the glue in with the fingers, not on the piece that go in. And as it goes in, you absorb the moist from the glue and swell up, and you have a perfectly tight joint. And if there's no blabbermouth around, nobody will ever know that you fixed it. When the glue is dry, you can cut it off. And now I plane down the pins so they are flush with the surface of the side. Then sand it, and now the drawer should be ready to go in, but before you do that, I chamfer it, the bottom inside of the front, so the corner wouldn't hit the side when you put it in and out. Then I chamfer the back of the drawer too, so it will go in easy. Sand it a little, and now the drawer should be ready after you made the top of the drawer and the bottom of the drawer flush and sanded it. The insert seems a little darker, but that's because you absorb the glue. So eventually when it dries up, the color will be the same, okay? The drawer should fit, but if it's a little too tight, move it back and forth in there, and any place where the wood is shining, sand it off, and you go very easy in. Sometimes you get an idea, but you can't really draw it. Like in this case here, I want to make a concave panel. I have a piece of wood that's 3/4 of an inch thick, the same thickness as the panel is going to be. In the bottom, I glued a piece on to keep it square to the bandsaw. I marked the center, and then I marked the depth. Then I take a stick and bend it. And then I have my grindstone draw the line.
Okay, go ahead. And then back again.
So now because of the piece on the bottom, now the piece is perfectly square to the saw.
Okay.
And because the bandsaw blade is square too, you come out perfect.
The maple workpiece is glued down to the base with paper in the joint. That's chopping bag kind of paper.
Take your time, and when you're cutting it, be sure the saw blade is on the waist side of the piece. To make the real panel, I made a jig with exactly the same curve, and I used a hand router with a 1/2 inch bit and just moved back and forth and sideways and just remove the wood. Then because of the paper, I just have to hit it and it comes right off without spoiling the piece. Okay, then to get the bandsaw mark out, I rough sanded it. Then I cut the angles, and I start with putting narrow angle first. If I don't like the shape, then I can reset the angle and cut a little more off. When I had the angle I wanted, then I put the chalk on, which will represent the veneer. In this case, it's a chalk from a pool table. Then I put it up against the back of the wall so I could see it every morning I come in. So after 3, 4, 5 days a week, I decided that is the thing I want. Normally, when I make a frame and panel construction, I will use a Mortise and Tenon because it's a much stronger joint. But in this case, because of the sharp edges on the panel, so I want to continue the line into the frame. So I made a hidden spline miter. I marked the face so I know where the bead is going to go on. This is a very old mortising jig I made many years ago, and I'm still using it. Now in this case, I use it for a 45-degree joint. And being a cheapskate, I didn't want to make a new one, so I just cut off a 45-degree angle. In front of the frame, I mark an 1/8 of an inch for the wood to be removed for the bead. And I mark the center for the mortise. Then I put in a 1/4 of an inch for the bead. First you cut the 2 ends. Because of the rotation of the bit, the router wants to go to the right when I pull it. So I have the fence on the left side and I do all the cutting pulling the router to me. If you do it the wrong way, you will only make that mistake once. Now I'm making the spline. Be sure that it fits very snug. Then I'll cut it to width. And I rip it just like I did with for the hidden spline miter in a carcass. Don't use your fingers to remove the cut off piece, because those 10 fingers is very important. And I love them all because we've been together for 79 years. As you can see, the long grain in the spline go across the joint. So it is a very strong joint. It's just about be impossible to break it. After the cabinet was finished, I looked at the door and I thought, gee, it would be nice to make 4 panels and make a frame and panel cabinet. In this case, I could not use the hidden spline miter joint because when the frames go together, it is long grain to long grain. So instead, I have to use a spline and groove joint. I mark the top of the side panel and the face of the top panel. This is the top panel. So I have the mark down towards the table. And then I make the cut, of course, on the inside of the frame. For the side panel, again, I have the mark side down towards the table. Then I send the spline through the thickness planer until I get the desired thickness. Then I will cut it in width and maybe make it about a 32nd needle narrower than the depth of the 2 grooves. I use the marking gauge to stop the groove so it become the same distance on each side from the edge of the frame. Yeah, but I'm going to do it this way first. I continue the groove by sliding the chisel to the end mark. Because it's a little too short, you know. Then I square out the ends. The spline should fit, but go in easy, because when you put the glue on, it will swell anyway. What's the matter? Is it too wide? Because both pieces were cut with the same setting at the router, so you can see it's flush. And this is the way that this cabinet is put together. It is just 4 panels splined and grooved together. Most woodworking technique has been handled down from generation to generation. Each generation might improve or add something of their own, and they should be willing to pass it on. I hate people who, when they discover some new technique, try to keep it a secret and are not willing to share it. When I was an apprentice, I hated the cleaning up, but today I really like it because now I can sweep the floor and go right home and kiss my wife. Some people talk about veneer as that modern stuff, but they think about plywood. The Egyptians used veneer over 3,500 years ago. I have experimented veneering over solid wood, and by carving and removing some of the wood, I've got some interesting designs. After the top is glued together and dry, plane and scrape both sides. Be sure they are perfectly flat. From the flits of the veneer, choose a part that will give you a good, interesting match. Mark it and cut it to length. To join the edges of the veneer, clamp it between two boards that is planed convex to give it pressure in the center. Run it over the jointer and check that all the pieces are joined. If you don't have a jointer, you can use a hand plane. Lay out the veneer, put the joints together, nail them using thin brads. Then use gum tape to keep them together. If the veneer is buckling, use some weight to keep it down. When the tape is dry, cut the veneer to size using a veneer saw. This is a little dull, so I have to put a lot of pressure on. Normally, I use yellow glue because it dries faster. In this case, I use a powder resin glue because it is rotose and the veneer is oily. Mix the glue. The condition should be like heavy cream. Be sure that there is no lumps in the glue. Use a paint roller to spread the glue. Be sure it is an even spread and there is no bare spot. Don't put too much glue on, which will result in poor adhesive and wrinkled veneer. Then put the veneer on, flip it over and put glue on the other side. Be sure to have paper between the veneer and the cowl. The top caul should be 1/8 of an inch larger than the veneer. The bottom caul can be 2 inches or more larger. Tape the caul and all the pieces together and put them in the press. It is best to be 2 people, especially if it is a large piece. Close the back using the C-clamp. Start the compressor and push the back very close into the edges of the piece so the back won't break. I use the vacuum press. It is cheaper than a regular veneer press. Easier to use. It also takes up less space in the shop. When not in use, roll up the back and store it. With 21 to 25 inch HG, you can get approximately 1,764 pounds of pressure per square foot. After taking the piece out of the veneer press, clean all 4 sides. For removing the tape, use a cabinet scraper. Don't use water to remove the tape. Tilt the table saw blade 18 degrees and cut all 4 sides using a ripsaw blade. On the top, mark the center of each side. Mark the bottom of the bevel on each corner. Put in a nail, which is okay, because the corner will be broken later. Use a flexible piece of wood to mark the curves and bandsaw them out. Then plane and sand the bevel and the edges. The legs are veneered on both sides. Then carefully bandsaw them out and smooth them using a spoke shave and a scraper blade. For checking if the curves are even, use a 1/4 inch piece of plywood or solid wood. Now put the glue on. Put the leg down on the bench. Put a 1/4 inch piece of scrap wood underneath, smaller than the leg, to raise the leg up a 1/4 inch from the bench. The veneer is a 1/2 inch wider than the thickness of the leg, so the veneer will stick out a 1/4 inch in each side. Again, have paper on to prevent the veneer to stick to the wood. To make the 45-degree bevel on the four edges on the legs, use a spoke shape. Notice the bevel is larger in the bottom than the top. Now sand all parts of the base before gluing them up. Then put on the glue, and for clamping the legs, use a custom-made block to clamp on. And check to be sure that the distance is the same from corner to corner, and check the distance at the bottom of both set of legs. 25 and an 8. Glue thing I have. Glue on the shelf support and check if they are aligned. This one and the bottom. They're both at the same time, right? Yeah. Wash off all glue joints when the glue is still wet. Okay. Then let the glue dry, sand them lightly, and put on the finish. When my wife, Emma, and I got off the banana boat, we didn't have any money. So when we want to make a salad, we had to use some cheap fork and spoon to toast it. When we got a little better off, I thought it could be fun to make a salad service out of wood. And of course, the simpler, the better. So I got the idea with using two shoehorns, like you can see here. And it has an S-curve, so they won't slide down into the bowl. I chose to make the salad service out of walnut. I begin by flattening one face and both edges square on the joiner. Then I plane the other face parallel. I mark out and cut 10 blanks for the bending. In this case, 3/16 and 1 inch thick, which is 1/16 more than I need. When my stock gets to 10 to freehand through the bandsaw, I set up a simple guide to support it. Now I'm going to check this plane. As you can see, it's a very thin piece of wood. The most thickness planer has rollers here in the bottom. As you can see, now you see there's two pressure roller up here above. My hands is the pressure roller now, so you can see both rollers is moving. But it has a disadvantage because a piece of wood is so thin. Can you see it is moving up and down? There's no connection between the center of the wood and the bottom of the thickness planer. So now the wood, when it goes through, will start vibrating. The knife up above will shoot up in all small pieces, and it gets right down in the garbage can. To prevent vibration, I put a piece of 3/4 inch piece of plywood in there, but you put a stop on the plywood so it doesn't go through. Then as a piece comes through, it will come out perfect. You might have to put it through 2 or 3 times to get it down to an 1/8 or an inch. When you put the wood in from the infeed table, please be careful because there might be some rough grain and the wood will kick back and hurt your fingers. Here's a glue-up jig. There's a piece of ash and it's just bandsawed out. Each radius is 7 inches and 7 inches. I just smooth them a little so the wood will slide easier. You don't have to fit in perfect, because when you squeeze it down here, the two pieces in the center will force themselves together, so you get a perfect glue joint in the center. This is a powder resin glue. Be sure to read the label so you get the right mixture. When you mix it, don't put all the water in at once. Add it slowly, or else it will be one big lump and you can't use it. And you put in a little more water. It has to be like heavy cream. When you apply the glue, be sure use a cheap brush, because it's just about impossible to clean the brush so it's usable again. In this case it costs 20 cents, so I threw it out. Be sure to put paper on the jig so the piece you're gluing up don't get stuck to the jig. Start clamping it in the center. Be sure the center mark lines up. You can adjust it by using a hammer. Clamp it until the glue surface is tight together. Then put the two other clamps on the deepest part of the curve. Check it if the glue joint is tight together. Look for a little glue coming out, or if there's any opening, clamp it again harder. When you put the glue away, be sure that lid is down tight and turn it upside down. Now the glue will seal it so the air can't come in, because if the air come in, then the chemical process will happen. So next time you use it, you mix it up and glue it up, and then after 2 or 3 days it falls apart. Good morning. Okay, now the thing should be dry. It's about 24 hours ago. We clamped it. As you can see, there's still a little spring back when I took it off. Now, before you take it out of the jig, be sure you mark the center line on the piece. You see, when I scrape it, I can still draw the line across. Now I'm going to scrape it and sand it. The glue will dull any tool, so after I remove the glue, I have a sharp scraper ready. I use 80 grit and 120. Most people do too much sanding. Okay, then I turn it around and do the other side. As you can see, it's a little springy, so I'm going to support it with a piece of wood underneath. So now it's both sides are sanded. I'll take it out here and then put back the center line on the jig. Okay, so now we're ready to mark down the shape of the surface. Be sure that the line on the cardboard pattern and the line on the wood line up perfect. Otherwise, it won't work. Then I turn it around because you get two salad surfaces out of the one bend. So as you can see, I got one pair. And you see the scratch, the piece here, is a very good back scratch here. And oh, geez, that is good. Okay, if you don't have a bandsaw, now I'll show you how you can do it a different way. Okay, this is a saber saw. I screwed or bolted a piece of aluminum on so it becomes a jigsaw. Then I put it in here in the vise. But that's because the saw is going too fast, so slow it down, and it's more safe too. Now you can see the glue line, or rather matter of fact, you can. So you can see how perfect and how tight the glue joint is. This is a portable belt sander, clamped upside down in the bench, to straighten out the edges and remove all the saw marks. At the same time, you can remove a lot of the extra wood. You can actually start shaping it here on the belt sander and get it pretty close to finish it off by hand. So as you can see, I just roughed it out with the belt sander here, upside down. If you don't have a belt sander, I'm going to show you how you can do it in a different way. Now use a piece of scrap wood to lock it in to the vise. Then use a smooth plane to straighten out the edge and removing the saw marks. Perfect.
It's even easier to clamp down the plane than the curved salad silver. Just move the work past the blade and everything comes out just as nice. You can chamfer the edges with a rasp and a file and finish up with a scraper, but the surface you get this way will always be a little wavy. I like a spoke shave because it carves a flat chamfer, and it's a very nice tool to use too.
After the spoke shave, I use the scraper blade to even out the back. After the back is smooth, I finish it off with 80 and 120 sandpaper. Then I put on a non-toxic oil such as salad oil or vegetable oil. So now the piece is finished. I'd like to show you how to use them. So here, when you choose the salad, of course, you can do it like that. When you want to serve it, you can serve it like that. Or if you want to have a little more style, you can do it like that. The salad service here have one more function. You can actually have a little fun with them too. Like if you use it as like castagnette. Olé!